So, I don't know if you know this, but I kinda like Shirou Emiya. Now, if you're watching this video, I'm kind of expecting that you'll already know what the Fate series, and thus Fate Stay Night, is. If you don't, well... Ufotable's anime version of the Unlimited Blade Works route was a stunning adaptation that combined the writing of the original visual novel with Ufotable's signature, breathtaking effects and animation. It's a genuinely well put together project that made me love Shirou Emiya as much as I do. In fact, I'd call him my favorite character of all time. And the thing that cemented him on that status was his fight with Archer. The two characters are irrevocably linked to each other for pretty obvious reasons, but this moment is the climax of both their arcs throughout the show. A clash of their ideologies and values in a sword fight that changed both of their lives forever. So, this Shirou Day, I wanted to take a deeper look at the fight, as shown in Ufotable's anime adaptation. This is a bit of a different style of video than I usually do, so I don't know, subscribe and like the video if you want to see more stuff like this. Anyways, I would also like to make note that I'm only going to cover the anime's version of the fight. There's a very good reason for this. And it's that I haven't played the visual novel yet. Okay, not yet. No, I haven't played it yet. Okay, I'll get to it. Now, while I do plan to read the visual novel, and maybe even on this channel, at some point, I don't feel comfortable talking about it in an analytic, interpretive way when I haven't read it for myself. So, I can't talk about any specific parts of it, especially how the visual novel is different from the anime's version of events. This is solely an analysis of Ufotable's anime and the narrative weight behind its form of presenting the fight to the viewer. Whether or not the anime is a good adaptation of the source material is not a question I'll be answering. That's up to you. I will say, though, that there's a strange reputation that the anime has in some circles. Ufotable is known for its expressive, flashy animation, especially in action-filled scenes such as fights. Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works is no exception to this, and obviously the anime looks gorgeous. However, there's some who think that stellar animation is all that the anime has to offer outside the visual novel, with narrative meaning sidelined for raw bombast. Unlimited budget works is a tongue-in-cheek term that's thrown around to describe the anime's awesome effects and animation work. While I will admit that it does seem like there's some scenes that have more spectacle than perhaps is needed, that spectacle is, to me, accompanied by symbolism and story weight. I mean, does it really matter if Shirou leaping all across a battlefield in the Gilgamesh fight is inaccurate if the story still communicates its overall meaning? I don't think so. I just think it's fun. Maybe it's not obvious, but at least to me, there's meaning everywhere in this anime, if you're willing to look. Although I'm not a media analyst or an expert in cinematography or whatnot, I did pass high school language arts, which might not be saying anything, but you know, don't worry about it. With that said, a lot of this is my interpretation and opinion. Your understanding of the anime might be entirely different from mine, and I think that's valid. But interpretation is a big part of fiction, so I encourage you to think critically about your favorite media, as I'm trying to do now. Find that meaning, my friend. Obviously, there's gonna be massive spoilers for Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works, and I highly recommend that you watch this show before this video. It's a fantastic series with a lot of heart, and you can tell that the people behind it are just as big of Fate fans as we are. Now, without further ado, this is
I am the pawn of my soul.
We open on the Einsburn Castle. Shirou, Saber, and Lancer arrive amidst the rubble and debris from Iliasville and Berserker's tragic loss against Gilgamesh. Waiting for them opposite is Archer, sitting patiently atop the center staircase, draped in darkness, fitting for the most mysterious of all the servants in the Fifth Holy Grail War. Not long after their arrival, Lancer departs to look for Rin, leaving Shirou and Saber with Archer. And already there is metaphorical significance in the structure of the scene. If you're observant, you'll notice that in almost every scene where Archer and Shirou are together, the composition of the shots tries to put some form of distance in between the two of them. This could stand for multiple things: the rift between how the two of them view Emiya's ideals, the gap that Shirou needs to cross in order to reach Archer, or perhaps simply, Archer's disdain for Shirou Emiya. In any case, the metaphorical and literal distance is emphasized by this shot, where Shirou is both far from and beneath Archer physically as he sits at the top of the staircase. Of course, still with both Shirou and Archer is Saber, who stays to bear witness to the upcoming battle. Perhaps it is because Shirou's wish to save everyone is something very similar to her own wish to save her country of Britain in her time. However, her current wish is to undo the decision to become king, regretting her path that led her kingdom to ruin. Perhaps she feels a similar desire to Archer then. The Throne of Heroes records heroic spirits from all across time. As such, it's entirely possible to summon a servant who was a hero from the future. In his time, Archer was someone who fought in a war, a conflict which has yet to come. Emboldened by his ideal to save everyone, he went on to rescue people from danger, no matter the side they were on. But who could understand a man like that, whose only motive was to help others? In the end, he was betrayed and framed as the perpetrator of the war itself, and then executed. How powerless he must have felt to have dedicated his life to saving people, and, in the end, not being rewarded with the salvation of everyone. Thus, Archer had made a pact with the Counterforce, the planet's own will to protect humanity, to serve as a counter-guardian in the afterlife. But even then, his wish was not fulfilled. To be a counter-guardian is not to be a hero, not in the way that Archer wanted. They are summoned to times of disasters and warfare, times in which mankind is threatened, and extinguish that threat through violence. In his words, they only clean up after humanity's messes. They are butchers bent on killing everyone that's a threat to humankind, no matter if they're good or evil. And so, Archer did. He killed and he killed. He killed without ceasing, and he killed until he finally stopped caring. Each life taken meant thousands more would be saved, and yet, he never got what he wanted. Not in life, and not in the afterlife. Never once did Archer see a humanity without strife. It would not be inaccurate to say that Archer was betrayed again, and again, and again. Once at his execution, second by the Counterforce, and finally, by the ideals he so valued. A man who wished for a world without tears could only find humans who cried suffering forever. With words of bitterness, Archer says he became the hero of justice that Shirou Emiya always wanted to be. The hero of justice that Shirou Emiya would be. As foreshadowed several times throughout the series, Archer was the heroic spirit Emiya. In other words, Shirou Emiya's future self. Saber even calls him the embodiment of the ideals and wishes of Shirou Emiya. With this revelation in mind, Saber asks why he would want to kill himself. His answer was simple. He wanted to die. But as a counter-guardian, he is cursed with an eternal existence of servitude. There was, however, something that held a sliver of chance that let him disappear. Killing his past self. But even this may be fruitless, for counter-guardians are exempt from the bounds of time. Still, Archer was resolved to end his suffering no matter what. So determined to end this cycle of regrets, Archer proclaims he'd not only kill Shirou's flesh, but also crush his spirit. At the very least, the hero of justice would be a mistake that would never occur again. Ultimately, Archer threw a sword to the boy to give him an out. If Archer's words and existence offended him, then Shirou could save the effort and take his own life then and there. Thus, Shirou picked up the blade. Archer, do you have any regrets?
Of course I do.
Well, there you have it. We aren't anything alike.
What?
Because no matter what happens to me, I won't regret a thing. That is the reason that I can never accept you. If you really are my ideal, then it's up to me to correct the mistakes you've tarnished it with, and start over again.
That kind of thinking is where this all began. Before long, you'll wake up and find you've become me.
No. No way that's ever gonna happen!
Maybe not. You may yet escape that fate, but if you refuse to run, I'm afraid you'll have no future at all.
Archer?
Saber, it's okay. Thank you. But I still want you to stay out of this. This is my fight, and I have to finish it. Trace!
On. Do you think you can keep up with my blade works? If your precision is even slightly off, remember that it will mean your death.
Steel is my body, and fire is my blood.
And so, the fight begins in earnest. From the start, it's painfully obvious that Archer eclipses Shirou in strength, speed, and skill. He moves faster than Shirou can track and easily knocks him back with every blocked strike. Effortlessly put on the back foot, it seems that Shirou Emiya will die no matter what. After all, when put up against a better version of yourself, it's a simple conclusion that you would lose. As admirable as Shirou's signature tenacity is, all he'd be doing is running into a brick wall over and over until he crashed and burned. There's some great character packed into the small ways in which both Shirou and Archer fight, especially when compared to each other. Archer's poised readiness in his stance communicates his combat experience, as opposed to Shirou, whose more amateur style is shown in his own stance. It further shows the power gap between the two. But one aspect that often goes overlooked, maybe purposefully, is the fight choreography. It's really simple, without any complex maneuvers or flourishes, especially compared to other fights in the series, such as Archer's fight with Lancer just a few episodes before. Most of the attacks thrown out here are basic sword slashes and stabs from both Shirou and Archer. It does make sense. Obviously, Shirou lacks the strength and aptitude to match Archer, but this simple, easy-to-follow choreography carries throughout the entire fight, even as Shirou begins to match Archer later on. I think that this is done purposefully, not just because it makes sense in the context of the story, but because the actual swordplay is less important than the other parts of the battle, such as the dialogue, especially later on. This is less of a clash of swords, and more of a clash of ideals. At some point, Shirou starts to fight harder, even using Archer's own sword techniques against him. It doesn't take long before Archer realizes what was happening, though. Because they're the same person, every time they cross swords, Archer's experience and skills are conferred to Shirou, represented by the magical circuitry connecting the blades at the point of crossing. I'll get into more of Shirou and Archer's association with machinery later on, but just know that the design is purposeful. There's meaning if you look, as I said before. Regardless, this isn't entirely in Shirou's favor. Shirou might be gaining more of Archer's power and ability, but he's also seeing for himself how horrible Archer's life was, how horrible Shirou's life will be. The flashback sequence here is cold and grim. The cuts of Archer slotting swords into the ground are placed between shots of bodies, strewn with arrows and blades. The implication here is haunting. Archer hasn't simply killed a lot of people, but he's killed as many people as he has swords. And it is called unlimited blade works. And what did Archer get in return? Over and over he fought for others, Over and over he was betrayed, and over he was forced to clean up humanity's messes. It's no wonder why he's doing all of this now.
So that's it? That's how his life ended? I don't pity him. I don't pity him. I don't pity him. Still, if this is really the path I'm heading down, my heart's gonna shatter. Everything you believed in, what you still believe in, I see for myself now how all of these are nothing but a dream covered with lies.
Shirou!
Feeling ill? Judging by the expression on your face, I'd guess you're about to vomit. You saw it, didn't you? That simplifies things. Everything you saw is true, Shirou Emiya. That's what catching up to me means. See it again for yourself. The world I ended up in. I am the bone of my sword, unknown to death, nor known to life. Unlimited Blade Works!
I have created over 1,000 blades.
With the activation of Unlimited Blade Works, I wanted to take a moment to step out of the context of the battle and talk specifically about this noble phantasm. Now, bear with me because there's a lot to cover and establish here. In Fate, a noble phantasm is the crystallization of a heroic spirit's legend. They are the manifestation of a given hero's most famous aspects, whether that be the form of physical armaments or innate abilities. They are a heroic spirit's strongest, most trusted powers, and are thus a symbol for a hero in and of themselves. Oftentimes, a source of pride. That's why noble phantasms are activated by saying their true names. It's a proud declaration of who you are and what you've done. Thus, it could be said that a noble phantasm is not just a symbol for a hero, but also a symbol for that hero's ideals and dreams. After all, no weapon is wielded without reason, right? But Archer's is different. Yes, Unlimited Blade Works is emblematic of who Archer is and what he's done, but, well, it's definitely not a source of pride. Not the way it is now. Let's look at what it literally is first. Unlimited Blade Works is a reality marble, a type of magecraft that allows the spellcaster to impose their inner world upon material reality. And heroic spirit Emiya's mental world is a desert, a barren landscape dotted with swords stabbed into the sand as far as the eye can see. Floating gears rotate, spread throughout the smog-filled sky, the dark clouds barely permitting any sunlight to shine down. It's certainly a bleak sight to behold. The reality marble does grant Emiya his ability to recreate weaponry. One look at a blade, and it's instantly recorded into his mind's inner world. It is the sum total of every weapon that he's ever laid eyes upon. It's important to note here that Shirou Emiya's ideal, his dream to save everyone, is not his own. Originally it was his father, Kaiji Emiya, who wanted to be a hero of justice and save everyone, and Shirou simply took that dream as something for himself to strive for in Karitsugu's place. This is an important detail to bring up because Unlimited Blade Works is unable to create anything original. No wholly unique weapon is stored within the reality marble. In essence, it's a noble phantasm that copies noble phantasms. Fitting then, for someone who held copied ideals to be granted the power to copy the ideals of others. It makes sense then that if noble phantasms are symbols for ideals and people who hold them, that there are so many of them inside the reality marble. After all, it was Emiya's dream to save people, the people represented by swords. He could not save everyone in the real world, so his ideal is sublimated into a world in which everyone can be saved. But the way that the swords are stabbed into the ground feels purposeful. They could have just been strewn about, but the way that they're standing in the dirt makes them look a bit like graves. And if they are graves, then that makes it more ironic for Emiya. He saved countless people by killing countless people. The swords themselves are the main aspect of Unlimited Blade Works, and Emiya's association with swords is made very apparent throughout the series. However, there's a more subtle but still present association of Shirou with machines. One of the first things that we see Shirou do is help Issei out with repairing a heating unit. He spends his free time practicing his magecraft inside of a storage shed surrounded by tools. And that magecraft? Reinforcement, which the show depicts as bright, sparking lines that resemble circuitry. Shirou's own projection magecraft also generates sparks and surges of what, superficially, resembles electricity. Heck, some characters like Rin even straight up compare Shirou to a machine. A machine that does whatever someone needs it to do. A tool in service to others without any desire of its own. That's an apt description of who Shirou is. And the machine symbolism isn't just etched into Unlimited Blade Works, but further elaborated on. The eternally spinning gears floating amidst the smog-filled sky evokes imagery of a very specific kind of machine. A factory. Unlimited Blade Works, then, is a metaphorical factory that endlessly creates swords. Its lone operator overworked under his employment by the counterforce. In the end, Unlimited Blade Works is a representation of Archer's mentality. It's a world of ideals owned by a man who doesn't believe in them anymore. A land that copies dreams, tarnished by years of wretched work. Despite that, there are two swords in Unlimited Blade Works more associated with Archer than any other weapon. Not even his bow. Of course, I'm talking about Kansho and Bakuya. The anime never calls these swords out by name, but their legend is actually somewhat relevant to both Archer and Shirou in the story's context. Here's a brief summary, and forgive my butchered Chinese pronunciations. The story of these dual blades begins in ancient China, with a swordsmith couple, Ganjiang and his wife, Moye. The king of Wu had ordered the blacksmiths to forge for him a pair of blades. However, Ganjiang and Moye couldn't figure out how to craft the swords at a high enough quality that would be acceptable for the king. After much struggling, Moye decided to sacrifice herself, throwing herself into the furnace to offer up her chi, elevating the swords into the realm of the gods. The grieving Ganjiang was then finally able to craft the swords, a married pair of blades that represent him and his wife, Ganjiang's Kansho and Moye's Bakuya. But when it was time to present the blades to the king of Wu, Ganjiang only presented Bakuya, keeping Kansho for himself. Upon learning the deception, the furious king had Ganjiang executed. Now, what exactly does this have to do with Archer? Well, for one, these weapons are unique among Noble Phantasms and Unlimited Blade Works and even the entirety of Fate's Stay Night. Their story doesn't involve the weapons being wielded. They were swords created for the sake of creating swords, and because they were never wielded, never used to fight, means that unlike every other weapon in the story, they don't have an ideal or dream. That lack of an ideal or dream makes them perfect for Archer, a person who's disgusted by ideals. They are the only swords that he uses as, well, swords, that he wields in his hands. The other swords, such as Khalid Bolg, are utilized as arrows and projectiles because they are wielded for some reason, and thus hold meaning and ideals. Kansho and Bakuya lack that meaning because no one had ever fought using them. That said, Kansho and Bakuya being void of ideals means that they can still gain ideals. After all, Archer and Shirou have values they fight for, don't they? In fact, it's a bit more understated than some other symbols and visual metaphors, but Kansho and Bakuya are each associated with a different Emiya, Archer and Shirou respectively. Throughout the series, and especially this fight, Archer frequently leads his attacks with Kansho, and Shirou leads his strikes with Bakuya. Even in the sort of joint trace-on sequence right before the battle begins, Archer traces Kansho, and Shirou traces Bakuya. Now, let's start with Kanshou. This is the Black Blade, a sword that represents the husband, Ganjiang. It is this sword that Ganjiang keeps, which earns him the King of Wu's ire in the form of execution. Fitting then, that this sword is more associated with Archer, especially so being the first sword that he ever traces in the series. The sword is black and red, matching with the color scheme of Archer's armor and garments. However, it's less that Kanshou is a sword that represents Archer the person, and more that Kanshou grows to represent what Archer believes. Now, it's become a symbol of Archer's cynical nihilism. It's the jaded apathy that Archer fronts as a weapon wielded against those shining heroes who wear their prideful dreams on their sleeves. The bleak outlook he has on idealism and those who dare to hope. Through that lens, it's no wonder why he chooses to wield it against people like Cuckoo Lane and Artoria, knights known for chasing idealistic heights of glory and altruism. On the other hand, we have Bakuya, the white blade that represents the wife, Moye. As Kanshou is associated with Archer and his pessimism, Bakuya is associated with Shirou and his idealism. Once again, on a surface level, Bakuya is the white sword, and Shirou wears white and blue. Shirou's own name means white in Japanese as well, but let's look a little deeper. It is this sword that is given up to the king, the one that embodies the wife that willingly gave her life for that creation of the swords. In essence, someone who gave up their life for an ideal. Doesn't that sound familiar? Associating the sword with Shirou's character imbues it with a new meaning that mirrors its husband blade, becoming an expression of Shirou's altruistic idealism. It's the new symbol of Shirou's noble dream, a dream he'll defend against all who'd endanger it. That's why he wields it most against the people who threaten his dream, the biggest obstacle at the moment being Archer. The fact that Kanshou and Bakuya each represent a different mentality is important, because both Archer and Shirou often wield the swords at the same time. They're the only dual wielders in the show, and these clashing mindsets are reflective of how both Archer and Shirou have traces of one another inside them. They each have the potential of becoming the other person, which makes it all the more important that Shirou defeats Archer and his disillusions right here, right now.
Known to death, known to life.
The next we see of the battle is a shot of Bakuya, the blade clearly weathered from combat. As established earlier, Bakuya is the sword that best represents Shirou and his idealistic dream. Throughout the fight, Archer systematically tears down the ideals that Shirou so treasures. As the symbol of those very ideals, it's no wonder that the anime chose a shot that displays the sword in such a wretched state. As Shirou endures the physical and mental beating that Archer coldly torments him with, so too does his own belief falter, along with his weapon. The next shot doesn't show him in a much better light, with a weary Shirou kneeled down at the foot of a hill, clinging to Bakuya in both hands, just as he clung to his dream his entire life. Archer stands tall at the hill's peak, berating the boy as he's forced to stare up at him. This perspective forces on the viewer a much more vast sense of distance between the two, a sense of disparity between Shirou and Archer in a way that no other shot really does. It communicates not just the difference in experience and strength, but also of argumentative value and beliefs. After all, Archer stands with two pristine swords, while Shirou is left with a single, heavily damaged one. And the verbal beating doesn't stop. It's at this point that Archer calls Shirou out for who he truly is. A fool who knows that what he wants can't be achieved, and a fraud without anything about him that's wholly his own, and someone who has wasted his life on an ideal that could never be. And Archer should very well know just how unattainable that dream is. As the heroic spirit Emiya, he is a Shirou who is summoned at his peak, the person who embodies Shirou's ideals, and yet he tells Shirou that his dream never comes true. That's something that Shirou's already seen for himself. Of course, he isn't taking that lying down, and runs against Archer with that signature bull-headed determination that Shirou's always had. It's not long before the unskilled strikes end up with Shirou's wrist stabbed by Bakuya, though. It might be strange for Archer to land a blow with Bakuya and not Kanshou, After all, I spent a long time explaining the significance of their association with each other. But remember that more than the person, Bakuya is a representation of Shirou's idealism. Archer attacking Shirou's flesh with Bakuya is, in a way, a reenactment of Emiya's ideals betraying him. It's now that Archer asks the question, knowing everything, does Shirou still want to be a hero of justice? But to Shirou, it isn't a matter of wanting to become a hero, but rather that he will become one, because it's what he's always been passionate about. And as Archer continues to callously explain the shortcomings of Shirou and his dream, we get this shot of both Shirou and Archer back to back. Before now, in every shot that includes both Archer and Shirou simultaneously, there's always been an effort to establish a form of distance between the two. It speaks volumes when a shot like this exists, with the pair as close as possible, and they aren't facing each other. Two sides of the same coin that can never face the other. Two versions of the same person that can never accept the other as they are now. And Archer doesn't relent on speaking his case. If the heart of a hero of justice wasn't ever in Shirou, then he shouldn't have walked that path in the first place. That's a fact that Shirou himself always had in the back of his mind. Archer himself hasn't been fortunate enough to keep many memories of his youth. He's simply existed for so long as a counter-guardian that most of what was there had faded from his mind. But there was one sight that stayed. The sight of Karitsugu Emiya saving his life in the Fuyuki fire. It was a massive disaster that left no survivors, with a child who should have been beyond salvation being found by a man who longed to save anyone and everyone from suffering. And the confluence of circumstance brought a smile to his face and tears to his eyes. In Shirou's eyes, the true miracle could be either of them, the boy who was saved, or the man who saved him. In saving Shirou, Karitsugu had saved himself, a sight that began Shirou's own desire to save others, to have that happiness for himself as well. But seeing the beauty in someone else's dream and choosing to try and fulfill that wish themselves, to make that their whole being? To Archer, what is that other than hypocrisy? Other than arrogance and hubris? The result of that is someone who can only be described as a fake and a fraud. Someone whose beliefs are secondhand. And that's no way for a person to live. That person shouldn't have ever existed in the first place.
The ideals you cling to are second-hand ideals Karitsugu Emiya failed to live up to. In the end, all you're doing is imitating what he believed was right.
You're wrong.
Hero of justice. Don't make me laugh. Just because the idea consumes you, it doesn't mean helping others is something you truly want. It's nothing but a borrowed dream. Someone like you, thinking you could be a force for good. It is the height of hubris! That's right. You couldn't help but admire the beauty in your father's dream of helping others. That's why you never developed any real passion of your own. If that isn't hypocrisy, then what is? You're driven by this ridiculous obsession with sacrificing yourself for the sake of others, blind to your own arrogance.
No!
But in the end, you're a fraud, and your hypocrisy can't save anyone. How could you, when you never knew who you should save to begin with? And look, this is the result. You could never be a savior. You never had anything to save. You became the embodiment of justice, and justice can be cruel. Your ideals are falling apart. Maybe other people aren't more important than you are. It's dawning on you that a world where everyone can be happy is just a fairy tale. And if you can't live without that dream, then let it drag you down and drown you.
It's true. What he said was mostly right. But I couldn't help thinking there was something he missed.
Hell withstood pain to create many weapons.
I saw hell. I saw hell. I saw hell. I saw the hell that would someday be mine. This is how Shirou describes the flashbacks he sees amid Archer's memory. I find this specific line of description interesting. These images of war are not simply hell-ish, but Shirou calls them hell itself. It's the same way that Kiritsugu describes what battlefields are to Saber. Because to someone like Shirou, a battlefield is hell. People die on both sides, so that neither is completely saved. A horrible thing to witness for someone who only wants to help everyone. And the imagery is immediately painful to look at. A maximum of 2 arrows dot each body, most of them only needing 1 shot. Perhaps that's a mercy that Archer tries to grant them, that eventually became colder mechanical efficiency. Fitting for a man who effectively became a machine. Regardless, these battlefields, these hells, will one day be something that Shirou will have to accept. Hells that will someday be his to bear. In the end, Shirou has to admit, Archer was right. Everything he said was true, and he has the experiences that prove it. In spite of all that time and effort poured into achieving his dream, what he got in return was nothing short of failure. Archer lost. He lost a lot. Although, I suppose, you could say that he actually tried not to lose anything. And he didn't. Not one thing. He had fought for the one thing to him that mattered, his dream to save everyone, to not lose anyone. He carried that ideal to the end, never losing sight of it. But there was one thing he did lose, something he forgot. Why was he doing it in the first place? And thus, Emiya returns to the hell that led to all the others. The child that would become Shirou Emiya walks through the flames of a disaster that claimed countless lives, sobbing at the horror of it all. It doesn't make any sense. Why did so many innocent people have to die? Surely they didn't do anything to deserve such a cruel end. And their deaths weigh heavy on the boy, as the faceless ghosts stare through the inferno at him, while he trudges onward amid the rubble. It's yet another hell that this child keeps walking through. The first hell in the life of Shirou Emiya. But what was the point? Why was Shirou saved from this hell? Well, why did Kiritsugu save Shirou? Why did he have that dream to save everyone? Put simply, it's because the notion was beautiful. Archer does a mechanically efficient job at coldly disassembling every part of Shirou's ideal of saving every person in the world. His argument is sound, and no fault can really be made against any of the points he makes. But Shirou answers this cold logic with warm emotion. Shirou and Archer both saw the beauty in Kiritsugu's dream to save everyone, and that beauty stirred something in them. Lit a spark that ignited their motivation to accept the dream and pursue it just as their father did. And no amount of experience or hard cynicism can break down the feelings you have towards your dream. That spark that ignited your dream, even a borrowed one, that spark is yours. Why walk into hell? Because the idea of undoing that hell is a beautiful one. And Shirou has this realization set to the most fitting insert song to ever play in an anime. Heimer's Last Stardust is both beautiful to listen to and a lyrically reflective piece that embodies the characters of both Shirou and Archer perfectly. Please, look up the translated lyrics. The song is flawless as a fit for this moment and this series. As Heimer's song plays, Shirou feels something else stirring within him. the scabbard of Avalon that Kiritsugu implanted in him to save his life. It's a noble phantasm named after the magical utopia, a world where everyone is saved. This fittingly embodies the emotional spark that kickstarted Kiritsugu's dream to become a hero of justice that could save the world. It's only now that it is evoked, that it activates, when Shirou remembers why he walked this path in the first place. Because it too was there at the very beginning. Emboldened by Avalon, Shirou walks through the hell that birthed him, a rubbled distance that takes him uphill. He walks until he reaches a peak, arriving upon a mound which is stabbed with a single sword through a stone. It's a strikingly evocative moment, with a distinct visual parallel. Quite clearly, it is analogous to the moment in which King Arthur was to pull the sword from the stone and accept the burden of the royal crown. It's pretty reflective, down to Archer acting as Shirou's Merlin, presenting a question of warning. Was this truly the life that he wanted? That of a machine? Yeah, he does. Even if it's a life dripping with hypocrisy. A life that Shirou isn't suited for. A life that upholds an impossible ideal. It's worth it. That's why, even though Shirou's hand catches a flame as he grips the handle, he's able to pull his own caliburn from the stone. Because if he feels the spark that fuels his dream, then there is no doubt that he is worthy to walk the path of a hero of justice.
See, her scabbard. The linked saber that Kaiji Emiya implanted in us to save our life. Not an ancient relic or something that had to be summoned. Though the pack is severed, its protection still remains.
I am.
You wouldn't.
The bone of my sword. I can't lose. Not to you! I'm not afraid of losing. But there's no way I'm gonna lose to myself.
You're finally standing on the threshold. What good will it do you? I'm certain you've noticed by now. Your skill and mine are worlds apart.
My belief may have been defeated, but my arms and legs still work. I honestly believed you were right. But now I know that isn't true.
What?
I see that being right is the only thing you actually care about. Well, none of that matters to me. I'll become a hero of justice. And just as you can't accept me, I'll use every ounce of my strength to defeat the part of me that's you.
Yet, those hands will never hold anything.
The battle within Archer's mental world continued to rage on. The clashing of blades amid the factory of swords echoed across the smog-filled skies. Yet, something was different. With one swipe of Shirou's Bakuya, Archer's own paired blades began to crack and shatter, forcing him to knock the boy downhill before a hasty repair could be made. But Shirou stands more defiant than ever. How is it that he's now able to begin cracking Archer's swords, when just before the opposite was happening? Within the story's context, Shirou was simply absorbing more knowledge and power from his clashes with Archer that he's now beginning to match him in projection. But the visual metaphor posits another reason. Blades represent the dreams and ideals of a person, and before now, Archer had been relentlessly wearing down Shiro's ideals to deconstruct his dream of heroism. But now, Archer's cold logic is starting to wane, as Shiro's heart fills him with all the purpose he needs to believe again. The bite behind Archer's words starts to diminish as well. Despite how furious he's getting and how right his case is, all he's doing is reiterating the points he's already made. They don't matter anymore to Shirou Emiya. Now, despite the distance between the two within this shot, to Shiro, Archer somehow doesn't seem that far away anymore. This is reflective in the way that the pair fight and clash with each other too. Shiro is actually starting to put up much more fight than at the start, resolved by a newfound appreciation of his dream, and powered by the skill and experience he's throwing all back at his future self. And quite literally at that. A shot of Shiro thrusting Kansho instead of Bakuya seems odd on the surface, since Bakuya is the sword associated with Shiro's mentality of valuing idealism. But in this context, it makes sense. Shiro said he'd defeat the part of himself that would become Archer, so he is metaphorically throwing every bit of cynicism and self-doubt right back at him. But on the other hand, why is Archer so hesitant now? Despite Shiro's new resolve and accumulated skill and power, nothing is stopping him from just using his superiority to wipe Shiro out then and there. He's probably had several opportunities to just kill Shiro. So why? Why is Archer bothering with a fair fight? Looking at Shiro, he's completely dedicated to taking down an opponent. But that opponent isn't Archer. Not anymore. When we get a shot of Shiro's eyes, it isn't Archer that's reflected in them. He's not the one who he's determined to defeat. Rather, what's shown in his eyes are the clouds of unlimited blade works, the reflection of Archer's mentality sublimated into a reality marble. Yet, despite the black smog that covers the sky, Shiro sees the rays of light that begin to shine through the dark pollution. There's a chance, however slim, that the hero of justice who earnestly walked the path of his ideals still existed in Archer. And the thing is, Archer sees that too. He senses familiarity as he stares down at the ragged figure of Shiro's battered body, a man who's never been beaten or succumbed to despair. His spirit remained unbroken, even under the weight of a dream so vast it threatened to crush him. He kept trudging forward, carrying the burden of the ideal to save everyone, taking on the entire venture alone. Of course Archer would know this man. He sees this man, and he reflects. The perpetually turning gears suddenly stop. The factory slows down. And for the first time in a long, long eternity, sunlight shines through the clouds of Archer's mental world. Archer reflects on the familiar man he sees before him, on the man he once was, on Shirou Emiya. As Saber says, the opponents that Shiro and Archer are fighting now are no longer each other. Shiro has begun to battle with the part of himself that would block the road to his dream, to stay true to what he believes in. Meanwhile, Archer is fighting the part of himself that would allow someone like him to exist, and erase the mistakes that he would eventually repeat. Saber has been present for the entire fight, even following Shiro and Archer into Unlimited Blade Works to continue to bear witness to the battle. I find it interesting that she stays, specifically to watch their duel. What she does not contribute to the fight in setting, her presence does contribute to the narrative of it. As Artoria Pendragon, Saber also upholds her own ideals. She led the kingdom of ancient Britain after all, and her reign was an attempt to save her countrymen from turmoil. The choice to walk that path of a hero, a king, to try and help the citizens of her country is culminated into the moment she decided to draw Caliburn from the stone. However, that decision did not lead to what she had hoped. Although subdued by a lack of focus on her, Saber's dream for the Grail is to undo the decision to become king, a desire not too far from Archer's desire to wipe Shiro out and put a halt to his path to become a hero of justice. But watching this battle, and the answer that Shiro had arrived at, perhaps she can let that regret go as well. Perhaps she can be content with the decisions she had made and the effort she put forth to follow her ideals. In a way, Shirou had saved her without knowing. I think he'd be happy if he knew what he did for her. But even still, that does not absolve Shirou of the battle still being waged now. Despite the inner turmoil that Archer is grappling with in the face of such a familiar figure, he's still capable of killing Shirou here and now, something Shirou is well aware of. Still, the boy remains defiant, but Archer has stopped pulling his punches. For the first time in this fight, he utilizes unlimited blade works to conjure swords as projectiles, something that Shirou hasn't mastered yet. Archer hadn't broken his will, but he can still kill his body. He knows that if he doesn't stop him now, he never will. And now, with depleted mana, a battered, tired body, and only a cracked Bakuya to fight with, the only thing that pushes Shirou onward to keep fighting is his dream. But wasn't that always the case from the very start?
That's too bad. Your spirit outlasted your mana. Now it's the only weapon you have. In any event, the Battle of Shirou Emiya is about to end.
Yeah, I get it, you're right. My wish really is fake. But there's something beautiful about it. Putting others before myself is hypocritical. I understand that. Still, I couldn't help but admire the idea. I thought how great it would be if I could live like that. Even if my life was a sham, there was still beauty in that wish, in doing whatever I could to make others happy. I won't let that go. Even if it is foolish, I won't give it up. I don't care what you say. I don't care if I'm a fraud or a hypocrite, 'cause I know my dream's not a mistake!
Go to hell!
It's not. It's not. My dream is not a mistake!
I'll become a hero for you. Just leave it to me. I'll make your dream come true.
This is cruel. Forcing me to look into an old mirror. There really was such a man once.
So that's it. Against all odds, Shirou defeats Archer in this battle of ideals, changing Archer's mind on his own dream and forever altering the state of his unlimited blade works. They're both left with a single copy of Bakuya to wield against each other, symbolizing their renewed, full faith in their ideals. Archer finally grows reason to hold hope in his eyes, and he can finally admit to himself with pride that he was never truly wrong. Thus ends the climax of Ufotable's adaptation of Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. But what exactly does it all mean? You could take it at a more face value approach. It's better to help other people even if you are limited, rather than to lament that your limitation prevents you from helping everyone. But I think there's a more universal message you can glean from this. A message that can apply to you no matter who you are. You see, I love Shirou Emiya. I think I've made that fact abundantly clear throughout this video and others. Again, he's my favorite fictional character of all time, let alone in all of Fate. However, I wouldn't say that Shirou Emiya is the character in Fate I relate to the most. There's traits in him that I can kind of find in myself, but not as many as you'd expect for a main character. The protagonist of the series at that. No. oddly enough, I find myself relating less to Shirou and more to Archer. Now, it's not one-to-one. I'd like to think I'm not as pessimistic as he is, for instance, and obviously I'm not eternally bound to serve the world, developing a hatred for my younger self for deciding to follow his stupid dreams. But we can all get like that, right? When we're young, one of the biggest questions we were asked was, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's a simple question, and oftentimes children give simple answers. A firefighter, a doctor, a teacher, maybe even a hero of justice. Sometimes these dreams are changed over time, but other times, children carry them throughout their whole lives. They dedicate themselves to following that dream to its very end, only to fail. Their aspirations simply too big for them. And with that in mind, it's no wonder that Archer ended up so jaded and cynical. I mean, who wouldn't be? After determinedly following their dream, adamantly walking the most difficult roads, they end up falling short, stuck in some horrible place. Eventually, you'd grow to hate your younger self for trying so hard too. Oftentimes, we get older and our dreams get a bit more muddled than they used to be. Perhaps there was a brief moment in time where our younger selves truly believed they could and would do everything in their power to achieve their dreams. They, in their purest forms, hold their head aloft and shout that they'll become their ideal no matter what. In that regard, just as much as Archer is the ideal of Shirou Emiya is the ideal of Archer. When Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works first aired its English dub almost 10 years ago, Kaiji Tang wrote a post on Tumblr. It lamented how he often compared himself to the previous English voice of Archer, Liam O'Brien. Now, no matter your opinions on the original Dean adaptation of Fate Stay Night, I think it had a fantastic English cast. And so did Kaiji, a Fate fan long before voiceover. He racked his brain on how he could equal Liam's stellar performance, embodying the awesome superhero that Archer was. Eventually, he decided he wouldn't. He'd play the subdued, beaten-down swordmaker, full of apathy and hatred for his younger self. He played well off the determination held by Bryce Papenbrook's Shirou Emiya, who stubbornly bit back against that cynicism with bull-headed idealism. But just as Archer finally acknowledged that his younger self was never wrong, so did Kaiji Tang. He mused how a frustrated younger Kaiji would be if he heard him groaning about how he would fill Liam's shoes. And just as Kaiji Tang had a younger self within him, just as Archer had a younger self yelling at him, we all have our own Shirou with us, a younger self growing upset at our lack of confidence, and we are so much better than they were before. I imagine they're saying something like, "I'm not able to, but you are, so why aren't you?" And I think they're right. This is what Shirou Emiya teaches us. That it's not wrong for you to follow your dreams. You value them for a reason, and that reason is beautiful. Every dream is like that, and there is meaning in every dream, even those unfulfilled. I can't promise you that if you chase your dream that you'll achieve it. I simply don't know that. But what I do know is that if you tried your hardest to follow something beautiful, your life will have had meaning, both in the journey and in the answer you find at the end of it all. Because there is meaning everywhere, if you are willing to look. So I urge you to keep walking the path of your dream. Keep striving to become your hero of justice. I'll be right there with you, trudging that hard path towards my own dream. Why? Because I know your dream is not a mistake. Happy Shirou Day, everyone! Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. This project really took a lot of effort, so I really appreciate you taking the time to see it. It isn't really my usual content, I really just do voice acting for memes and some covers, so I hope you enjoyed it! Big shout out to BuzzleB23 for voicing Saber and young Shirou, and also for editing the fandub sections, and also shout out to Seven the Vampire for voicing Archer. This was a personal project, so I wanted to have some close-knit friends to work with me here. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. Maybe I'll do a retrospective on all of UBW in the future. But hey, that's all for me. Take care, happy Shirou Day. Later, gamers.